So good afternoon, everyone. It's pleasure for us to join hands with Technology Development Board to organize the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav with Science and Technology. The ISBA and Technology Development Board, the Indian Steps and Business Incubators Association, and the Technology Development Board had joined together to organize 5 events, and this is the first event on Indian incubation ecosystem. And on behalf of ISBA and TDB, I take immense pleasure in welcoming the panelists, the speakers, and the participants. Today we have with us the who's who of the Indian incubation ecosystem. We take pleasure of welcoming Dr. Anita Gupta, Advisor and Head of National Science and Technology Entrepreneurship Development Board, Department of Science and Technology, for accepting our invitation and for delivering the keynote address for this session. We have with us Ms. Paini Bhatt, the Chief Executive Officer of Science IIT Bombay, and we have Mr. Chintan Bakshi, the partner of Jaipur CI.co, Dr. Ramji Palela, the CEO of AAC CCMB Hyderabad, and we have an entrepreneur with us who has been incubated and who have been successfully growing his venture with various support from the incubation centers as well as the support extended by the various government agencies. Mr. Pranjal Mehta, CEO of UB5 Technologies Private Limited. And today's panel will be moderated by Dr. Balchandran, Vice President ISBA and the Senior General Manager of AITTBA. Also with us, we are happy to have Mr. Prasad Menon, the Vice President of the Indian Steps and Business Incubators Association, and the CEO of the SIBA Mumbai. So without taking much time, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Anita Gupta, who is the Advisor and Head of National Science and Technology Entrepreneurship Development Board, the board which has been pioneering in promoting entrepreneurship as well as incubation ecosystem in the country since 1983. Dr. Gupta has been an administrator by profession with more than 20 years of experience in managing the various programs on innovation and entrepreneurship under the umbrella of Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. She has been a lead catalyst in establishing more than 100 TBIs at various academic institutions as well as research and technology parks. She has been instrumental in carving out a new umbrella initiative under NSTDB. It's called as NIDI, National Initiatives for Developing and Harnessing Innovations under Prime Minister's National Initiative of Startup India. She also spearheads a new and exclusive component on women entrepreneurs in technology, and few of her recent work are first of its kind initiatives in the country, which includes setting up department's first research park at IIT Gandhinagar, seed and acceleration programs for startups, and various innovation challenges, national level and international level challenges on science and technology. We welcome you, ma'am, and it's our honor to have you with us to deliver the keynote address. And we look forward from you insights on entrepreneurship promotion and also on the way forward in this domain with the support of Government of India. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Suresh. Very good afternoon and greetings from Department of Science and Technology on this occasion of celebrating 75th year of our independence through Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav initiative. And as I speak, Suresh has already shared that DST has really since over 3 decades laid the building blocks of incubation ecosystem in the country. And having said that, we have already also tried to really put in various systems and processes how our incubation program could be relevant to the needs of startups, the new age entrepreneurs with the changing times, with the changing needs, and the changing focus of our national program, national initiatives, and how could really we bring out, churn out value-added services in the whole incubation program as we move forwards as to tackle various challenges being faced by our country, nationally, globally, regionally. So with all these aspects, we have seen the evolution of incubation. Now so it can be called as an incubation as an industry, because you see Startup India has listed more than 700 incubators, which includes accelerator as well. So this is a sizable number as far as our country goes, being the institutional programs and initiatives to nurture startups in the country. But what really, how does the road looks like? What have been the learnings? What have been the challenges in terms of the incubation program being sustainable, or churning out sustainable business under its incubation offerings and value added services? This we have to really take a call that whether so-called 100 unicorns which have come out from Indian startup ecosystem, how many really went through the incubation journey to say what has been their experiences. So incubation program ultimately requires the key aspect is how it can be relevant to the need of startups, given now startups have a choice all over. They can move and seek incubation program anywhere in the country. And also another aspect is, given the value added service programs, which is a key highlight, one of its key offering is seat support. Now we have multiple government departments which are offering support, and it is not only binding that the recipient or the applicant has to be incubated startup. So given the pandemic, the first thing which has really made incubators reach out to startups which are other than their physical incubated ones. So virtual incubation has now become a critical aspect and a pipeline of support system for startups in the country. So now to say, moving forward, what how the really rate themselves, judge themselves from the perspective of a startup or from the perspective of a customer. Startup is their own customer. How quickly they can make them market relevant, confident, and given the Nidhi program which has been rolled out, now we have offerings, various type of offerings to each provided to each stage of startup, whether it's the ideation stage or it's a product development stage, it is or looking for market traction, validation stage, and then also attracting external investment angels and VCs. So if you track the progress of a startup from ideation to market, we have different programs suited to the needs of a startup in its journey. Now time has really come. We have 3-4 cycles of Prayas program and EIR program, which are positioned as a pre-incubation program to really judge its impact, how it has really delivered to the objective. But I am told three cycles of findings are available with me. So they have really made a dent in terms of creating the good pipeline, generating the confidence. And since 70% of these recipients have really formed their startups, have become formal part of being a startup. So this has really led to the growing of startups in the country in a way, and in the incubation scenario. The rate of startups formation is close to, I am told, 10 startups are being formed every day. Not only restricted to metros, now we have tier 2, tier 3 also coming up with their own incubation program, startup support activity. So in terms of it has landscape has really changed and is being now bigger and better. Given that there are 7, I could really jot down 7, 8, you can say, programs which needs to be really now focused on as we move forward. So first is like PMO is already in that direction, and they have asked Niti Aayog and DST is to really come out with a common assessment framework for incubators. Although, as I said, we had laid the foundation of the incubation program, but now various floors which and layers which have been added are by different government of India departments, whether it's DBT or it's METI or it's MSME or other sector like now IDEX program of space of defense. Space has also its own program. So different layers are now being added and all are contributing to startup ecosystem. So how we can really, it's a high time incubators being the key potent tool of supporting startups. How could we really assess under one platform? So what is the common assessment framework? Can we devise one? That is the one thing. Or can we have a common marketplace for startups as a collective? So the thoughts are also on those directions and lines. Marketplace. Another is like while most of the DST supported incubators are sector agnostic, how could we really come out with a good incubation program for deep tech startups? Now, deep tech startups are now also another focus area, given the manufacturing and being Atmanirbhar Bharat is also a key agenda and national initiative. How could we really contribute in this direction? And if you really trace 10 years down the line where we want to position India in terms of energy, what's a green energy, hydrogen, how many EVs? So where are those startups? Do we need to create incubators focused on these new directions which we have and start planning well in advance? So because see these kind of initiatives, whether it's a EV where India has to really evolve, we need a different set of push from the government. We need a different set of people who will be managing the incubators of these kind, very focused one. They have to closely work with government in terms of what kind of policies which are required initially. So these are some of the thoughts. Like, and apart from that, like with so many incubators in play, where is a finishing school for incubation management? Do we have the leadership program where we, like anyone institute which has got funding for incubator can send their you can say incubation team to be trained in this direction? How does the incubation work? Because now everyone is trying their own piece, but like what we have seen from DST experience is that it really takes 2 to 3 years for any new institution to take some grip on the incubation program. So how we can we shorten that period where like the funding is given immediately, team is put in place, and the 5 years of funding really is really beneficially and fruitful. Our experience shows that it really takes 5 years is extended to 7 to 8 years. So can we really shorten that period, create a class of people who are incubation managers? So where they could get real hands-on training, hands-on experiences. That skill set is really developed. So I think it has to be hit up on multiple fronts, and then seed support is being the key value-added services. The entire understanding of the how the financing of startup takes place. So creating a class of people who could be only sort of a akin to fund managers and under the whole space very well. Because ultimately aim will be the incubators who offer seed support, create startups who are like investment ready, from readiness is enhanced for external investment. You create a class of startup which could be unicorns or so and also what are the who are the incubators who can really enable the startup establishing the internationalization aspect or global market access. So these are the new facets of now incubation, which is fast emerging and which is really a shift from the perception of that incubators offers only the modern workspace. Apart from that, now it's a value-added services and the connects, market connects, be it national level or global level, a strong mentorship support. Where is the army of mentors, if to say, identified under various, you can say, the journey phases of the journey of a startup, domain-wise mentors. So all these are the new dimensions to the incubation program as we move along. But like ultimately, the process will be, or the direction will be to arrive at a assessment framework given, because so many government of India departments, state governments, all are working to support the incubation program. So we have to really review them, assess them periodically. So that will be, these two will be the key aspects as we move along. And in terms of incubator, like once the government of India funding stops, what are the sustainability, operational sustainability model to be put in place, and that has to be really thought of. Although once DST's core funding stops, there are other support offerings, because DBT onboards, METI onboards incubators which are supported by DST and are performing well. So that's one aspect. But like operational sustainability in terms of if you are taking equity, can you really liquidate that equity, or what are the other sources of your raising revenues and resources, that has to be really thought of. And DST, as a part of its enhancing its outreach, we had rolled out a new program, is the ITBI, wherein our intent is to really reach out to the geographies and the domains which have been not covered so far under our program. So we'll be supporting close to 25 new incubators this year under ITBI. This will take our tally close to 190 or so. So we'll be touching 200 in a year in terms of DST supported incubators. So these are some of our thoughts, like what could be done to really have a say in terms of what sectors should be focused. Now is the time where we have enough experience, enough successes so far in terms of creating a generic incubation model. Now is the time to really, based on whether it's agri-based manufacturing or the energy, new age transportation like EV. So where are the incubators who could support and guide such kind of startups in the country? And this space is really going to, I think, next 10 years will be furthermore defining moment for Indian startup ecosystem, incubation ecosystem, where we aspire to position India from being the third largest to maybe second, or even may top the chart of the startup ecosystem in the country, given the push, given the thrust, given the emphasis by government of India, joined by state governments, and now many more corporates are coming. And due to COVID, we had a very good experience of working with startups through Kavach program, and also through Nidhi for COVID, where we could support 100 odd startups. I would urge upon Suresh to bring out a coffee table book to really highlight some of the successes which were churned out in a short span of time, where the startups could really come out with the products to tackle this COVID challenge. And another thing is, as I've shared with you, with some of you, that we are planning to have a showcase of DST supported successful startups. Uh, Plan is to have after a month or so. So the process should start. where we could showcase their successes, because we need to really show to the world, show to the key people that the way DST incubation program has really come out, and the kind of offerings and kind of support system through various programs such as Nidhi. It has really helped them to really navigate this journey in a better way, in a timely manner, and the program is really impactful to say. Last year we had done study by IIT Kanpur. Now is the time to really come out next 2 year what has gone in the pandemic time, and these are the some of the focus areas. One thing is missing is that, like, although we pioneered industry led programs, India Innovation Growth Program, Power of Ideas, Texas Instruments, all these programs have taken a hit during COVID time. So we have to revive and engage with industry in much more meaningful way. Uh, Few have approached us also. So our intent will be really to come out with good programs with industry partnership. So I think what I have shared with you, the same goes with the incubator also, how to engage with industry, whether it's a CSR, whether it's a, so incubation program has to really now scaled up by all the at least performing incubators, and then the ones who are at the initial stage of their journey, incubation journey, they can look up to the other performing incubators, and so the benchmarking of incubators will also be really important, I think. Needless to say, incubators are going to be really a critical aspect in supporting startups, but particularly the academic institution driven, where students and the young professionals are being targeted. So thank you, Suresh. Thank you, ISBA team. Thank you all those who have joined in. I think the panel discussion which is to follow, do share with us the key recommendations and the what are the directions collectively which have been, you can say, are being highlighted through this panel discussion. And if need be, we could really look into the recommendations carefully to include them in our next offerings, future offerings. So thank you. I'll have to leave and wish the event a success.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your insights. And really, we have to thank NSTDB DST for all the initiatives to promote the startups. You have covered, your department have covered all the stages of product life cycle or the startup life cycle, right from grand challenges to power of ideas kind of programs to PAR fellowship programs, proof of concept support programs, and whatnot. So we have been a role model for various departments, and we look forward to your continued support. As mentioned by you, right, ISBA will extend all possible support in showcasing the successful startups in coming months, as well as coming up with the coffee table book map. So we are working on it, and we also look forward to engage with you in new initiatives and new programs which will keep on changing as per the needs of the startup community. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Balchandran, who is the Vice President of the Indian Stetson Business Incubators Association and also the Senior General Manager of VIT TBA Velo. He has put around 2 decades of experience in the innovation and incubation ecosystem, being the key person in the growth of the VIT TBA, as well as making the startups into a successful one in a tier 2 city like Velo, and has been a backbone in bringing in various programs to that region, that part of the region in the state of Tamil Nadu. Happy to have you with us, Dr. Balchandran. And we also have an eminent panelist representing across the cross section of the country. So we request you to take over and look forward to a fruitful deliberation for next 1 hour. Over to you, Dr. Mala.
Yeah. Thank you, Suresh, and good afternoon. I welcome all the fellow panelists, starting from Ms. Boini Bhatt, CEO of Sign at IIT Bombay, Mr. Chintan Bakshi from CII CEO Jaipur, Dr. Ramji Palela from CCMB, Atal Incubation Center, CCMB Hyderabad. And we are also expecting one more panelist. He is likely to join in the next couple of minutes, Mr. Pranjal Mehta, CEO of UB5 Technologies, popularly known as the E-Plane company from Chennai. So this is an interesting composition. There are senior experienced incubation managers and also a startup. So the purpose of this particular session is to take stock of the situation as to how this Indian ecosystem, especially the Indian incubation ecosystem, is functioning as of now, and what are all the issues, challenges predominantly faced by these incubators and startups associated with these incubators. Going forward, what could be certain proactive measures our stakeholders could consciously take to improve even Dr. Anita Gupta in her address was mentioning about the aspiration of the government to become the second largest ecosystem in the world. So I think it's more of a kind of a group brainstorming exercise, but in case if anyone from audience, if you want to reach out, you could send chat messages. We'll also take into those aspects as part of our discussions. So if you really look into it, in the last 10 years, a lot of action has taken place in Indian incubation system, which was some 60, 70 incubators, which was prevailing in the year 2009-10. Now we are talking about close to 600 to 700 incubators, depending on the numbers where it comes from. And the variety of incubators, whether it is public, private, or public-private partnership mode, not for profit, for-profit private incubators, there is again a variety based on the structure of the incubators. There is also, in terms of the focus areas, the thrust areas, the technologies they support, the range of startups they support, the duration of the incubation period, the offerings, whether there are a full bouquet of services starting from ideation to facilitating venture capital fund, or these bouquet of services are available. There is also again segmentation based on the location, whether they are urban or rural or semi-urban, the industry connect. So there are several dimensions that define the ecosystem, several actors involved. So in this discussion, we are going to take about 5 or 6 key aspects and understand the situation and also provide some food for thought this afternoon. So without further ado, I would move on to the first topic. So this is about the ecosystem, the world's ecosystem itself. We are being positioned as the third largest ecosystem. So I would start with Ms. Boini Bhatt. You have seen in the ecosystem, you have been in the ecosystem, you were an active player in the last 20 years. So what do you think the current state in India, and what is actually working very well, and so what could be done to improve this further? Over to you, Boini.
Thank you, Valda. It's really nice to be here and seeing some new faces also. So hi, Pranjal, we haven't met, but like before you join, I'm managing incubator at IIT Bombay. So, Bala, coming to, I think, your ecosystem related question, you only mentioned, right, that like India is third largest ecosystem, right? And we can't come to this level or startup nation, sorry, third largest startup nation. And we can't come to this level unless there is a, very, very mature or supportive ecosystem in the country, right? So you spoke about like about 15, 20 years back when some of us basically dabbled into this incubation space without knowing what exactly we were doing. Yeah. So we didn't have a template those days, right? So we evolved, each of us created our own template and started working on it, right? Uh, so, like from then and now, if you really look at in those days, I think we had only two stakeholders when it came to startup. One was academia who were hosting incubators like us. Yeah. And second stakeholder was government who was supporting those academia for setting up this incubator. And then they were also supporting startup via some small funding. Yeah, so that was, and that happened for quite a long time. I think most of towards the end of 2000, like until we started seeing like later part of 2000, like VCs and angel community coming forward and engaging with them, engaging with startup ecosystem. I think initial stakeholder was pretty much government and some of the players like us who were basically helping startup incubate and grow from a very small to go further. Yeah. Uh, main then over a period of time, I think especially in last decade, in fact, middle of the last decade, so 2015 or 16, we saw like pretty much every stakeholder participating in this startup ecosystem. And how did it work? One is that government, yes, but it all started with like DST, then there was TDB startup funding, and then there was METI and so on and so forth. But nowadays, whenever you talk about any state government, any central government ministry, you have startup program. Yeah. As an incubator, we felt that all this ecosystem, maturing ecosystem, we would be completely irrelevant, but that has not happened. So I think we are also, some of us are really doing good in that sense. And while ecosystem on investment supported startup ecosystem is very differently evolving, academia or incubators are also churning out really deep tech kind of startups. So we are not completely irrelevant. So that's a strength of incubator. Yeah. On funding side, like we are seeing angel investor, we are seeing institutional capital, we are seeing even strategic capital. Yeah. And HNIs and so on and so forth participating in startup journey across the stage and across the domain. You talk about biomed tech or space tech kind of technology about like 7, 8 years back. It was unheard of then that they would receive funding. Now you see they are also getting funding. So BC community is really maturing here. So basically contributing here. Corporate, Dr. Gupta talk about corporates and startup. Corporate, forget about startup, they were not even engaging so deeply with academia, like uh, and from there now every corporate having open innovation program, their accelerator program, uh, investing their CSR towards innovation and entrepreneurship, and also corporate investing as a strategic investor. I think corporate also has basically walked a long way. We would still need much more basically contribution or participation, especially startup accessing market. Yeah, we would we would want more and more corporate earmarking some kind of pilot fund for startup. Like you have R&D fund, you create basically startup pilot fund. Yeah, so those kind of thing we still need it, but I think they have also now gone deeper in startup ecosystem, right? uh, Entrepreneurs, uh, uh, all this soft and e-com too, like you see deep tech and healthcare and biomed tech, they have risk appetite going for a long haul. It's that is another thing that is working out very well. uh, Another thing that has happened is that because of all this startup and vibrancy in the whole thing, the expert ecosystem started engaging, like legal, chartered accountant, mentors. Yeah, those kind of ecosystem also has evolved quite well. And I think I'll close basically the classic example on this ecosystem with this COVID, scenario. Pandemic, if it brought out, all of us suffered, but it also brought out a very high strength in, our own ecosystem, where we also saw, industry came forward for scaling up investment, supporting startups, so and so. Investors also like created all this ACT grants, started working with government and the startup, and then supporting for their scale up capital and all those stuff. So I think pandemic saw the maximum collaboration across various ecosystem in at least in our context out there, coming out, supporting each other. And I hope that we really leverage the next phase based on this particular collaboration. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Punya. I think you have covered a wider ground and brought out several aspects pertaining to the larger ecosystem. So let me move on to Chintan, the same ecosystem question, but it's a different context. You are from the western part of India, traditionally a stronghold in terms of entrepreneurship. But when it comes to the new age startups and the kind of culture, the kind of requirements, the playing ground rules are different. How do you think both the states, Gujarat, Rajasthan, traditional entrepreneur belt, how are they performing in terms of accepting to this new norm, and how is this play happening, Chintan?
Yeah, thanks, Bala, and wonderful to be part of this discussion, brainstorming panel discussion. So yeah, I think very relevant questions. And if you look at I was looking at the traction ratings of states in terms of states which have been able to attract venture capital. It's not states, sorry, cities which have been able to attract venture capital. So apart from the usual suspects, Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, and then Pune, Chennai, and probably Hyderabad. I mean, these are maybe sort of 1 crore plus kind of metros. I mean, the next two sub 1 crore cities are Ahmedabad and Jaipur, right? It's not Chandigarh, it's not Indore, it's not Lucknow or whatever. And I suspect it's because of that. And that's what we have also observed. When we started, and as Poini was talking about, when we were trying to find our feet, when the word startup was also not clearly defined, what is a business, what is a startup, etc. One of the things that we realized in these two states, in Gujarat and Rajasthan, that while the focus was more on traditional entrepreneurship and trading and dhanda kind of businesses, but at least that mindset change was not required, right? Which you might, because we are doing some programs now in Assam also, and in the northeastern states. So in some states which are not traditionally entrepreneurial states, there is that additional challenge of risk taking and entrepreneurship being mainstream, or rather not being mainstream, that one has to tackle over and above the other risks that are associated with starting up, which are many. So at least that we did not see in these two states, and there were people who were willing to take up some challenges or the others, but of course it took time before we could see many successful tech-based startups, innovations, IP, etc., emerge from these two states. And as the figures that I mentioned, that as per Traction, the latest 2021 report, apart from the large metros, it's Ahmedabad and Jaipur which have been able to attract the maximum amount of venture capital or institutional capital or angel funding. These are the two sub 10 million sort of cities which have been able to. So I think it's an important factor. Related factor also is, and what we have also been able to, the other added factor is because there's at least a traditional base of businessmen. So let's say the Thai chapter in Rajasthan or the Thai chapter in Udaipur, I mean, when I'm saying Jaipur, Udaipur, or for that matter, let's say Ahmedabad, I mean, these would be traditional business people, maybe the second, third generation kind of folks, But the other thing that we were able to find in these two cities, I'm talking about 2013, 14, 15, when we were trying to build regional programs in these two areas, is that we also had a ready base of mentors who, of course, needed some reorientation in terms of how to mentor a startup like organization, because you're not building a conventional business. So there will be some pivots, there will be, a high technology risk. There will be these kind of issues which are not associated with a more conventional sort of a business, but they were able to get that fairly fast. So that's the other thing we noticed, that we were able to get a ready base of mentors who had run successful traditional businesses, but with a little bit of orientation and support from a lot of these organizations like a TIE or a CIE or a FICCI, etc. We had a ready base of mentors. And a lot of these mentor groups, we realized, also sort of evolved into angel groups. So, the Rajasthan Angel Investor Network, Ahmedabad Angel Investor Network, is one of the first few regional or local angel networks which got set up. They may not have scaled up exceedingly or become super successful, but having an angel network in a Jaipur or in an Udaipur, there's an angel network in Udaipur, there's an angel network in Surat, it kind of provides that completion of an ecosystem, in that sense, that there are incubators, there are mentors, there are angel investors who are there to back you if you're able to come up with a good business plan, etc. So I think these were a lot of the root causes of all these were the underlying sort of business ethic, business structure, and kind of ecosystem in a certain way which was already there. Yeah, so just wanted to answer that.
Thank you. Again, brought in interesting perspectives of the previous traditional manufacturing businesses and entrepreneurs vying for support or extending their experience and support to the new age startups. So let me move on to Pranjal. Pranjal, you have been a student of IIT Madras a few years ago, and you started this venture, E-Plane, the E-Plane company, with your professor, and also like the general tradition in IITs is once you finish your UG or PG, go to US, pursue your graduate studies or PhD, and so settle there. And but this mold is breaking, and a lot of interesting stories have come from both IIT Bombay and IIT Madras in the last 5 years, and the numbers are steadily growing. So you were from the trenches, and initially you had some difficulties, but now I think a lot of support is available. So could you just elaborate on what worked in your case in the both micro ecosystem of academic institution, the advantages therein, the challenges, and what could be done better to create 100 more branches in every other institute?
First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity, sir, to share my thoughts on incubation in India, and share also our journey, our challenges, and things that we have benefited from. Uh, Interestingly, people my age are quite simple. If something looks cool and attractive, we do it. So I think one of the discussions was, how do you make entrepreneurship more widespread in the country? It is simply to make it more attractive for younger people. Shows like this new show that had come out, Shark Tank, etc. These are making ownership the common dialogue in households, which is now making it more attractive for everybody to either take up a job or start their own journey. Myself, in 2017, I started along with Professor Satya, who's now my co-founder. It started as a project at IIT Madras where I was studying. And interestingly, IIT Madras, right from I think around early 2010s, had a policy on incubation for startups where professors were encouraged to work with students to spin off lab projects into successful ventures. So there is a deep, you can say, history to what we have done. And even before Plain at IIT Madras, there is a rich culture of entrepreneurship, particularly that of technological products, whether it is Aether Energy, Detect Technologies, building underwater ground robots or electric scooters or satellites and rockets. All of that is happening at IIT Madras, and that is largely because the kind of nature of incubation at IIT Madras is that typically students have to collaborate with professors, and professors have some very deep research happening in those labs, which can then be commercialized. And hence we have seen a very large number of hardware, deep technology startups come out of IIT Madras. As far as the policy is concerned, there are various enablers right from early incubation to credits for taking up entrepreneurship activity. There are courses on campus that you can take if you want to learn. But, sir, in my opinion, the most important thing and that I have found is a lot of information is already available on the internet. A lot of intent is available, and entrepreneurship is already cool for students and young people. What was really needed, also available, was enabling, which is to simply say it is okay to do so, and if you want to do so, we will help you in so and so manner. So you can incubate at IIT Madras. You have access to the laboratories that you require, which is quite significant. For deep tech startups, the kind of equipment required is quite expensive, unlike a software startup where any laptop and you can say cloud service and a few websites you can start your product, right? For a hardware startup, a lot more capital has to go into R&D before you can see even a single rupee in revenue. And hence, access to laboratories at IIT Madras was quite critical for us, given that we could save all that cost upfront, right? And so, access to laboratories, access to talent. Students at IIT Madras want to do research over the summers, over the winters, even through the course of the semester. They would work with us in part-time capacity on our project. So, access to capital, sorry, access to talent, access to infrastructure, and the enabling through various programs. At IIT Madras, the incubation cell is quite active. They help bring VCs, government stakeholders, and various other stakeholders to interact with startups. So this is sort of the key levers that have enabled us to come this far. So most importantly, today startups require, you can say, support in the sense of a soft support. Funding is largely available, right? What is really required is this platform where a lot of the basic details that are not critical to a startup. For example, I'm building a plane. I don't exactly need to know how to file GST or how do I do my labor law, tax consultant, etc. And if all of these small uh, regular business requirements can be bundled into a program and given to startups, a lot more entrepreneurs will be able to function a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, I have one follow-up question before I move on to Ramji. So, thinking of even a flying car, it's not a very ordinary thing, right? It's an audacious goal, and probably first of its kind in this part of the world. So, how did that vision occur? Whose idea, and what made you to work on this project?
This is very early 2016. Professor Satya, my co-founder, he's an aerospace and combustion expert, was watching a video by Tony Seba, a thought leader on electric vehicles, on how the world is electrifying. And Professor immediately realized that though Tony Seba was talking about cars and two-wheelers, aerospace would also see electrification at some point. And rather than becoming obsolete, the idea was, can we embrace change and also lead it? So he started researching electric planes. I met him almost 6 months later in the middle of 2017, where one of my seniors introduced me to Professor Satya as a professor wanting to build electric planes. We would call it a Tesla battery packed into a Cessna. That was the earliest idea. And I got together with Professor Satya. We started looking at the challenges with electric planes. What could realistically the range be, the cost be, and so on and so forth. And coming from, so I grew up in Bangalore. The problem of traffic is very well understood. It can take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour for simply going about 10 to 15 kilometers. So electric planes were not going to go too far because of the battery energy density, but this would be much cheaper than helicopters and in fact be comparable to cabs that we hail today in the forms of Ola and Uber. And hence immediately that connection of can this solve the problem of people moving within cities happened. And that's where we said, okay, let's build a flying taxi, not trying to compete with commercial aviation. Let's not try to fly between Goa and Mumbai. Let's fly within the city at a price point that is comparable to Ola and Uber, and make it as reliable as possible so that this can be as widespread as auto rickshaws and cars and taxis. So that is how this really started. Though it has taken us a lot of time to build hardware around it, this was originally how we started. Sir.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. piece. And Ramji, like doing science itself is very, very challenging, and taking science to market through a deep tech startup is even more challenging. So the whole world wants to support most of the commonly known businesses, no? Web, e-commerce, and the traditional. So can you share some of your perspectives on building a startup which is heavily into science, deep tech, and it takes 7-8 years to even to decide whether the company will be relevant or not. So could you share your perspectives?
Yeah, thank you to ISBA for this opportunity, first of all. And yeah, Bala, I think Deep Tech, even as AIC CCMB as an emerging incubator, past 4.5 years, we are evolving ourselves to, kind of not about the quantity of startups. In fact, India is having a good number of startups, but again, challenge is which horses we are picking up at the best. So where we are also struggling, and whole India is actually struggling, where we are betting on. In that sense, especially for the deep tech startups, having their gestation period of 7 to 10 years, even more, at least to take 4 to 5 years of their journey, still a lot of challenges. We kind of understanding them. Okay, first 1 to 2 years plan is well and good. Okay, we can give these resources. Government is giving funding, but still the scaling issues and regulatory issues. Still we are not up to the mark. As you asked the question to Poini ma'am, regarding how India can actually go to world number 2. I think we have to accelerate many of these aspects of each of these aspects have to be reached out to very handy to each startup. So especially for the institutions like AIC CCMB, which is hosted by CCMB and all, more of academic scientists or entrepreneurs, that means academic innovators, they are coming into picture. For example, students are coming into picture. So incubators need a lot of hand holding through some acceleration mechanisms. That is one major challenge I feel actually in my 4.5 years journey here. So that these deep tech innovators and startups can actually do better, and they actually can understand what kind of challenge. See, I sign IIT or maybe CCamp or more, any other 10-15 odd years of those kind of incubators have those mechanisms in place. Still, I think, if other incubators, maybe whatever that we have in India, if we can able to actually support these kind of mechanisms by hand-holding with the right acceleration partners through, see, even DST's acceleration program and BIRACs and other agencies, they have the acceleration programs which may be coming to the incubators, but still, who are those right acceleration partners who can actually add some value? I think this is one aspect. And third thing, our perspective, especially for the startup, deep tech startups to grow in this ecosystem so that they can contribute to the national economy. The ownership of the incubators in these organizations, I think that is one thing. They have to be with their journey, starting when you're picking them, even before picking them to the incubation system, you have to actually understand their not only their business plans and other things, but at least all aspects, where they want to go and what kind of aspect. I think the mapping is very important so that you can address all those points. I think you have to be there with them. These are the 2-3 things I would like to tell. Maybe I can add more later on.
Yeah, thank you, Ramji. And moving on to Poini again, access to finance, like what started as a technology development board supported seed fund way back in 2005. We have variety of funding offerings from incubators. We have EIR grants, Prayas proof of concept grants, Mighty proof of concept grants, biotechnology ignition grant, which is a flagship program of BIRAC, and even in terms of the number of angel investors, number of VC investors, the foreign direct investments in the startup space, every sphere it is growing, and added to this corporate social responsibility based funding from industry is also available. So you have seen all these aspects throughout, and what is your take currently? Are we in a situation where money is chasing quality ideas, or there is still gaps for the startups to be addressed? If you ask Pranjal, you will say you will require another $10 million to go to the next stage. But there are certain gaps with respect to startups. But other side, many incubators are also chasing one particular idea, and same person gets repeatedly funded. So could you explain what is happening and what can be done better? Queenie, you'll have to unmute, please.
I think, Mala, it is very difficult to explain, but yeah, I'll tell you the good part and the bad part. Okay. The good part is that now capital is available and across the not too happy situation is that much of the capital is still chasing all this fast growing internet retail and those kind of startup and chasing unicorn and so on and so forth. So capital available for really, I would say, strong tech or deep science kind of a company. It is available, but I wish that there could be more, and then more and more startups basically can be, support, and their basically translation time goes shorter. So that's one thing. Yeah. Second thing is that especially in deep tech and deep science company, I think still predominant capital, so bootstrapping or jump starting capital, I would say, is still from academia, government sources. Only when they see, so like incubator or like our grants or maybe some of the other public grants, those kind of the sources. Only when they come up to certain level, I think the capital is available to them. Yeah. So there is a gap, though the problem is we are much better than what we were. I think coming to basically incubators capital, like there are certain not very uh, uh, happy trends basically, which is like even we have started as an incubator. I'm not I would not like to include me because we have a different kind of process, but I'm still including myself as a community. We have started chasing the uh, good entrepreneurs rather than our incubators. Basically, what is our fundamental role is basically to generate the pipeline of the startup from our own backyard, right? And most of us are in actually academia, yeah, or maybe in basically our network. Instead, the capital that I have it, if I say the Ramji ke incubator mein acha company hai, so before Ramji invest, I try to basically chase him. Or if Ramji has invested in something else or out of some grant, I'll see and then I'll push for that grant. So instead of two entrepreneurs becoming recipient, just one entrepreneur is becoming recipient of multiple government grant. I think out there, we are kind of losing our focus on building a large pipeline of entrepreneurs who are the first time, who could be the first time grantee or recipient. Yeah. So maybe we may need to think as a community that what exactly we have to do, generate a new set of entrepreneurs, support a new set of entrepreneurs, or just basically float around in the same network, or entrepreneurs who are floating around in the same network and want to keep on supporting. So this is where my observation is, Bala. But at the same time, let me put also this way, that there are some of the incubators have created amazing trend of creating pipeline to say, for example, CII, right? They created their own fund. They, technology is not their forte. They develop their strength basically in completely a different manner, right? So like, they have created kind of a template for other incubators to create their own fund, and then you look out at a various stage and support the startup. So there are some very, very interesting trend is basically some of the examples I already quoted.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to Chintan, see, the success of a startup is defined by their success in the marketplace. Unless they sell their products and earn revenue, one cannot say they are successful. And even the incubation's success is closely related to the performance of their portfolio companies. So, what do you think are the important areas where incubators can play a role in providing access to market support to the startups in their portfolio?
I think that's a very important issue which is now emerging, right? And perhaps that's what Pranjal was talking about. That's what maybe Ramji was also alluding to, that while we can give access to labs and funding is also available, or it's largely available, much better than what it used to be in the past. And certain basics have been covered by the ecosystem very well. And I think kudos to DST and others who have followed later. But I think this is really the proof of the pudding, right? Ultimately, it's really the success of the startup which defines everything. And we all know that the success rate of high tech or high risk startups will always be low. But at the same time, there's probably nothing more important than making sure that we are able to work with startups and essentially ensure that we increase the chances of their success. I mean, it will never become 100% or whatever, 80, 90%. But again, reiterating the same point, that's the proof of the pudding. So I would in fact even go to the extent of saying that in the incubator 3.0 or whatever avatar that we are in the incubation ecosystem, our ability to work closely with startups once we have given them the basic facilities, physical incubation, lab access, maybe funding, but our ability to work with them and increase the chances of their success. And success may not just be raising a Series A funding or whatever next round of funding. It really needs to be back to the fundamentals, right? See, ultimately they will be and a lot of us, Koini, I, and a lot of people have been around for quite some time, and we have seen that within the startup ecosystem there are these waves that will happen and booms and busts, etc., which will happen. So it's very important to stay focused on fundamentals, right? So in fact, within the regional initiative of CIE, the CIE Regional Innovation Foundation, which I lead, that's one of our key focus areas, that how do we understand startup health better? How do we evolve? Because the other thing is that lot of us will also have very limited staff. We won't have people, we can't have one person basically supporting 5 startups or whatever. We'll have, I mean, the ratio of our staff to the startups that we are supporting will be sort of whatever. I mean, it will be against us. So therefore, leanness in that approach is also very important. Use of, typically the traditional Marwadis, I think, figured it out. So they would have 1 or 2 KPIs that they would monitor, but they would monitor on it on a daily or almost on a weekly basis, and they would know exactly how the startup is doing. So I'm not saying that we need to go to that extent, but figuring out the KPIs which are very, very important. Maybe there are only 4 or 5 or 6, which is really what makes or breaks a startup. I mean, they are the real levers of growth or growth not happening. Figuring that out, and it may vary from startup to startup. So for example, we are doing this exercise for a B2B startup, and then we did it for a B2C. We realized that these are different metrics or different KPIs. So to answer your question, I think it's a very, very important element. It's going to become very, very important now in the phase of incubation that we are, when we have whatever 300, 400, 500 incubators. We have probably more incubators and a lot of funding. So the way in which incubators can differentiate themselves, stay meaningful, and ultimately sort of prove the point that why incubation is required is to be able to derive these processes, lean processes of supporting startups to help them at least achieve a certain degree of success. And as I mentioned earlier, success may not just be raising funding, but at least getting their basic fundamentals right. So at least there is some level of stability that's there in the organization. For example, one of the things I'll just giving as an example, a lot of startups are focused on top line growth. 10% growth चाहिए month to month basis, तभी जाके VC interested होगा. That's not true. Ultimately, a VC will look at things like customer churn. आपकी customer stability क्या है? Customer retention क्या है? I mean, they may look at such other things as an outcome, but fundamentally they look at the drivers of that revenue. So what are those 2 or 3 key drivers? So I think to again sort of maybe sort of conclude my statement, how do we get this? I think there are enough mentors out there, at least that's what we have realized, who may not have worked in a startup, but they would have worked in a more traditional company, but they have a good sense of how to measure the health of a startup with 2 or 3 metrics, right? Not going, spending a day with a startup, which is not possible for us. So how do you create these metrics through which we can at least measure the health of a startup and at least pinpoint what is that 1 or 2 significant risks that can take the startup down, and just tackle that, right? Ultimately, the startup has to be run by the founder, right? As incubators, we can just help them figure out this is what fundamentally your health is, and these are 1 or 2 kind of risks, right? आपका heart में ये problem है, तो आपको ये issue हो सकता है. So better tackle it now.
Yeah, thank you. I think your message also provoked Poini to share her thoughts. Over to you, Poini.
Yeah, I think, see, your question and what Chintan said, right, that the ultimately market performance basically is the key for a success of startup, right? Sometimes I really get maybe we are an incubator and we think in a very different manner. So I get very perked up with the success being celebrated with investment coming, like, or valuation, right? Instead of value that is created by the startup. And I just want to share one story here. Yeah, first academic link incubator, basically a unicorn from first academic link incubator that came out of Sign, which was Gupshup. Yeah, now Gupshup is a story, like if you look at it, very celebrated established entrepreneurs, basically they started Gupshup at Sign. In first 5 years, they raised basically 4 or 5 rounds of funding. Yeah, and they were in a space, that space was changing quite a bit. So company also pivoted from 1 to 2 to 3. There were 2-3 stories. So we always joke that, investors in a single round, they got like 4 or 5 stories from Gupshup. Yeah. Then after 2011, company just didn't raise a single money. Either they didn't get investment or they didn't raise, I don't know about it. But founder Birut Sheth, he simply focused on only top line and bottom line, just to answer, like, Chintan's question. Not only top line, but top line and bottom line. 10 years of dry spell, no investment. Company, I think, had about 600-700 crore of revenue. Yeah, with a very, very healthy bottom line. Very, very healthy bottom. So when they got funded after 10 years, it's very unconventional that startup initial funding, no funding, and they survive, and then again raising the fund. Yeah, when it got funded at a unicorn valuation. And these are the stories, basically, I would say it's a success story. Like, because Chintan talked about all those things, so I thought, let me give this example.
Thank you. Over to Pranjal again. Now, Pranjal, you mentioned about the issues related to accounting, GST, and even Narayana Murthy was once quoted saying the government did not know what IT was, so before that we grew and we become indispensable. So, what do you think are the major challenges for someone like you in the early stages of business, and what can be done to make the lives more comfortable and easy?
So 2 parts here. One is more specific to startups, and the other to deep tech startups, which is something that we associate with. For startups in general, ease of doing business has been a challenge, which has been addressed over years and gotten better, but there is more that we can do. especially since we are now playing in a global arena. There is a lot more that we can do. ESOPs, for example, even today, taxation of ESOPs, awareness, etc., is quite limited, and hence ESOPs, which is a very powerful tool to create wealth for everybody involved in the success of a startup and also attract talent, is very, very underutilized in what we call the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Uh, a lot of compliance, labor law, tax, etc. These are very, very small, you can say, requirements for a business like ours that make it harder to operate. Just the cost of compliance for a startup for every year is at least upwards of 20, 30,000. Startups in their early days have access to capital of about 5 to 10 lakhs. When you're burning 20, 30, 50,000 just on compliance, it gets difficult. And in fact, the challenge of not doing that is far worse, which is once you grow bigger, you are going to have almost various departments chasing you down because you have not done a particular filing a couple of years ago. So these are all very practical challenges for any startup in general. Coming to deep tech startups specifically, as you rightly pointed out, emerging technologies, new focus areas require a certain expertise and understanding to be able to make policy. And it is also unfair to expect that to exist within the government because these are new topics, right? So you need to have academia, researchers, etc., work with the government and educate them on what are the new trends, what are the challenges associated with these ecosystems and industries, and what can we do to enable them. For example, in our own space, even today, import export is a big challenge simply because we are in the aerospace domain. The components, the supply chain that we need does not exist here in India. That is a matter of fact for aerospace, right? And hence we need to import a lot of these small components today, which is okay given that this industry is coming up. However, there is no awareness of what are these parts, how to charge custom duty on them, should they be allowed to be imported or not. So especially in biotech, this is a big challenge, and in aerospace. So understanding what is required to allow these startups to be able to function from a supply chain standpoint is very critical. Apart from this, we need to enable supply chain creation. Today, historically, industry in India has been set up in collaboration with foreign countries where we have done an IP transfer and then either manufactured it here or licensed it here and sold it. If India has to grow and if we have to create wealth within, we need to develop IP within the country and then send it outwards. And that is only possible by funding the research labs in specific areas where key components, key technologies critical for emerging sectors like EVs, drones, etc. Those components can be developed within the country, and then startups, businesses can use those components, and overall the entire wealth creation is limited to India. So these are, I would say, some of the key requirements today. Another very important requirement, sir, is, and again very close to what we do. Even these days, I'm engaging with a lot of these and flying taxi forums with the government where they keep thinking, hey, what should we do better, and so on and so forth. And they're always talking about subsidies, GST, grants, etc. And my request to them always is, sir, money is available in the market. Any business will be able to attract money and either from an investor or a customer as long as the business functions. What we need from you are enablers. If I make a drone today, where do I test it? Who do I go and certify it with? Who can I go and collaborate with? There is no drone excellence center in the country. And so these are, I'm talking about problems specific to my industry, but again, these problems exist for every industry. If you're talking about a semiconductor, same problem exists. If you're talking about an EV, the same problem exists. So rather than focusing on the funding and so on and so forth, if there can be small think tanks set up in the government that actually work on policy enablers, right? For example, hardware startups require more land. We cannot just work out of any co-working space. So are there specific hardware accelerators, incubators that the government can create where there is more access to facilities and so on and so forth? Kerala government, for example, has worked on those lines. I think Karnataka government has done some work, but at scale, availability with ease, at the level at which it is meaningful, we have still not achieved in hardware. and deep tech is what I would say. Just one more point I want to make before passing it back to you, sir, is on the question of how do we make India this number two economy, right? And there are three things that at least I have seen where we are yet to catch up or we can do to sort of become the next big that the second largest startup economy. One is even today we use a lot of, you can say, products that are being built in the US and China and so on and so forth, but we are not exporting as much. For every Instagram, we need to have an app we are also sending out. So far, our success has been either in the local market or being software for businesses abroad. We have not really cracked the B2C international market. There is no Facebook that we have created, there is no Instagram that we have created, and so on and so forth. So building consumer technology for the world, we are just beginning to start. There are a few Southeast Asian countries where Ola's and Flipkarts have started their operations, but at a global scale, we have not done B2C. That is one. Number two, we have not built hardware. We are just beginning to build hardware, deep technology in India. Whether for India or for the world is a different matter, but we are only beginning with now. Whereas SpaceX, etc., Tesla are almost 20-year-old stories abroad. We are just beginning to start. So there is huge wealth creation that can happen in the next 10, 20 years in India when it comes to deep technology and hardware technology, which will be both beneficial locally and as a product outwards. The third most important thing is we have so far not attracted a lot of global talent. If you look at America, for example, a lot of the American startups are done by immigrants from other countries, scientists, businessmen, entrepreneurs, etc., migrating from other countries. We have not seen an influx of talent from other countries to India to either build startups or to work in those startups. Now, this is not necessarily important for startups to exist, but if we have to play at a global level, we need to indulge with the other cultures, with the other countries, because they will help bring insights onto the table that we may be overseeing today. So these are three key things that I believe will help us sort of unleash the next wave of variation in India through startups.
Thanks, Pranjal. Very interesting perspectives. And yeah, Ramji, so in Hyderabad, you have Google, Microsoft, Dr. Reddy's, Bharat Biotech, Shantam. So a lot of major players, whether it is IT or BT, you have giants there. And the startup and industry connect. Generally, there is a talk about academia industry connect. A lot more things need to be done there. But startups and industry connect. What are all the challenges, issues? Could you share some insights?
So we got, I mean, at least 300 plus such, bigger industries in Hyderabad, especially when you're talking about biopharma, life sciences, or other healthcare, including the TCS, Microsoft, or any other such kind of software companies which are actually starting their own life sciences and any other such deep science R&D and innovations. Okay, so the major challenge I can say is that at the base level, they're okay to kind of spare a lot of time with the startups. Maybe we design some other programs within our incubator, or maybe as a whole in the Hyderabad. For example, T Hub, we did a program called Rejig in 2020, and to support at least 300 plus startups who may be having some issues and all. So where at least a dozen of such companies came into, like Sanofi came, and BE and other companies, Dr. Reddy's and all, they actually talk to those startups and address certain issues that the startups are having. So this kind of connects we kind of facilitating. But otherwise, the major challenge in the sense is that the real case scale up or kind of manufacturing facilities, the leasing, because incubators cannot provide that kind of manufacturing facilities or leasing kind of thing. So that is where I think some of the diagnostic kit companies and vaccine based companies are having some problems, startups I mean to say. So that is one challenge. But otherwise, it is actually growing up. That kind of medium with industries and startups connection is kind of growing up in Hyderabad. Maybe in other states as well. I'm just expecting it may be growing up. But yes, we have to do a lot of things. Even just a couple of days before, one mature startup here asked, okay, just tell me which are those startups which are working good in your incubator. so that we can actually kind of invest, or maybe we can take them further for scale up and other things. So I think that medium and engagement we need to be accelerated. We are at some level, but yes, we have to increase. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Pointing the same context, the corporate startup connect, I'm seeing of late there is an increased interest. While it started with the CSR as a grant support, there is also technology scanning and see if the ideas align with the company's goals. See if there is a potential merger or acquisition opportunity, and so those things are coming to the surface. What do you think need of the hour to strengthen this aspiration from industry to provide more fodder to them so that this becomes an active value from the incubation system? Please unmute.
Sorry. So, Bala, on industry front, I think we have only one yardstick, right? That startup adoption, basically solution adoption by industry. That's one thing. Yes, CSR funding, strategic capital is happening. CSR funding towards innovation entrepreneurship is still very, very small. That needs to be enhanced. That's one thing. But at the end of the day, any startup you ask why they will look up to industry, especially B2B startup more as a market, right? And that's why there is a larger emphasis needs to be done. So even those corporate accelerated programs, there are so many of them and they are looking and working with startup. I don't think basically the internal adoption is actually happening there. Yeah. So there are a couple of reasons also, because the stage and the maturity level at which industry work and the stage and maturity level at startup work, there is always expectation delivery mismatch, right? There's startup may not be ready with the solution to be deployed at a scale in a time frame that industry wants it, right? So there is always some kind of even genuine issues on basically, at a stage and level and maturity side out there. I think what needs to be done is that, as I've been I also briefly mentioned about it, is that 10-15 years back we were talking about that how do you incentivize industry to look at even startups, and that thing we have crossed that stage. Now second thing is that, is there any incentivization or is there any motivation for industry to create the way they have R&D fund, they create startup fund just to pilot and validate startup solution? Yeah. So that incentivization could be from leadership, that incentivization could be as a corporate goal or whatever it is, or it can be basically some kind of push from government side as well. Yeah. But I think that's one thing, is that how do you accelerate adoption of startup solution by industry? That's where I think there is a big gap, and some internal external push is needed out there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Chintan, of late there is increased interest from government departments. The government also has given a mandate, a certain percentage of procurement has to happen from MSMEs, and even as a subcategory from startups. Defense has set in some examples. Space is opening up, and healthcare during COVID times, a lot of procurement took place. And so, what do you think need to be done to accelerate this thought process? Government as a customer.
Yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll also quickly transition from the earlier, because government, corporates, while they are different entities, but it's really the same issue, that how does a large organization which is set up for a different objective, how does it work with a startup like organization which is very, very kind of different in size, shape, nature, and is trying to bring an innovation or a technology into the market. So I think the issue fundamentally remains similar in both kind of organizations, though I mean my experience tells me, limited experience of some startups having worked with corporates and some startups having worked with the government is that, if the government is willing, then perhaps they could be an earlier customer, because, the objective of government is also to support or build the ecosystem, while the corporate doesn't have anything on those lines, right? The corporate will essentially look at things from a very self-interest perspective, that they should be able to bring this technology to market in 6 months. I mean, 6 months is also probably a very longish kind of a horizon for most corporates in India. Using a comparative sort of an analysis, I think perhaps governments potentially could be a better pilot customer, if I may use the word, for startups. Of course, there are certain things which need to be done. I mean, it's not a seamless operation. A startup cannot simply start working with the government, but we have had, I think, more cases within our portfolio of startups working with the government, typically on a project, than startups successfully working with corporates. I think what needs to be done perhaps is that I think a lot of the work would perhaps need to be done at the state government level, right? Central government will have their own kind of limited schemes, programs, etc., where startups can fit into. I mean, they would typically run a startup program or an acceleration program or a grant challenge of sorts. It's really up to the state governments to open up their kind of departments or programs or projects and start working with startups, and therefore it becomes more like a state government to state government sort of an initiative. I think again, if I'm just jogging my memory, we have had at least 2 or 3 startups which has worked with the Maharashtra state government. I think they had a policy around it where they would even give you a grant and then they give you a project and all that. So there are some schemes which are successful. There are some other governments, state governments, I won't take names, which have had similar schemes, but they haven't gone anywhere, anywhere further, right? I mean, while the schemes have been there, but we haven't seen too many action or too many startups working with them. So it's really, I think, boils down to the intent of the state government, how serious they are to work with startups. Some state governments have been able to do it fairly well. Others are struggling. They may have policies of doing procurement with startups, but we haven't seen much working out. So I think that's what my limited experience is. On the issue of working with corporates, I think that's a very, very relevant point which Koini talked about, that how do you bridge that gap? How does it become slightly more a smoother transition where a startup is able to work with a corporate? I think a couple of successful examples that we have seen is that once a corporate is able to at least acknowledge the fact that it's not going to happen seamlessly, and therefore you need some sort of almost like a transition department, if I may use the word, or setting up almost like an internal acceleration department which doesn't have people from their internal teams, which essentially have ex-entrepreneurs, or almost like setting up a corporate incubator of sorts, which is independent, and then it starts working with, and it has a good view to both the sides. So it has a good view to how the corporate operates, what their priorities are, what their timelines are, what their risk-taking abilities are, what are the domains they want to work in, and on the other side, they have a good view into the startup ecosystem. So perhaps a similar solution may be required on the state government front. Right? I mean, the entity which is working with the state government, as long as it's a competent entity, it's probably a autonomous sort of an entity. Maybe Kerala has a good model around it. As I understand, Punjab is also setting up something like that. Basically, setting up a separate entity which has a good view to both the sides. It's not controlled by the state government, but it understands their priorities, but it has enough independence to work closely with startups. So perhaps that's the solution. I mean, just a few thoughts around it.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to Pranjal again. So you are in the growth phase and obviously always looking for some good talent. So most successful talents, most successful startups had a knack to hire the right talent. And so how do you find this situation now? How are you in a position to attract good people to company, and what can be done to do this further?
So as you rightly pointed out, any startup success is directly related to the kind of talent it can attract and continuously attract in the long term, because as the organization grows, the requirement for talent only goes up. At Eaton, in the very early days, we had this challenge because the kind of expertise required to build a plane is significant, and that comes with a cost, something that we could not bear as an early startup. So we would rely on, you can say, interns, very passionate industry experts who were not necessarily looking at a very lucrative monetary compensation, but more aligned because of the vision and the passion to build something like this out of India. That was on the very days. Uh, our location also is slightly non-conducive to talent, which is Bangalore's weather is quite attractive to all the engineers graduating from colleges across the country. But Chennai, for that matter, happens to be slightly less attractive. So we had to do quite some work in terms of our PR, and also in terms of the word of mouth that we had to spread to attract talent. So we did two things. One, both Professor Satya and myself are quite active when it comes to interacting with media, posting online, etc. So we have sort of created an online narrative about what we're doing, which helps bring a lot of inbound leads. People reach out to us saying, hey, can we work with you, and so on and so forth. So that is one. Number two, internally, we have really educated our entire team that the success of our startup only is dependent on how many more smarter people, smarter than ourselves, we can bring onto the platform, right? And hence, all of our team of today act like hiring consultants for us. So, in fact, we have a few such champions within. There is one of our early employees who has single-handedly hired 15 people, which is roughly about 30% of our team today. So, these are things that we have done, and creating good, you can say, part-time programs is also rewarding in the long term. It might not be rewarding in the short term, but in the long term, we have found it useful. So we've been around since 19 as a project, right? As early as 19, when people used to intern with us in their first year, second year, today they are graduating and coming back and joining ePlane. So having invested that time and effort into interns very early on has helped us, because we are in it for the long run. So these are, you can say, three methods that we have deployed to be able to attract talent. And just before closing, I would say this has worked so far, because not only have we been able to attract local talent, we have got from all around the world. So we've got people ex-NASA, ex-NUS, ex-Georgia Tech, all coming back to India work with us on building flying taxis. So this has worked so far.
Yeah. Thank you, Pranjal. Ramji, like IP is becoming very important, especially for the deep tech and science-based startups. So from 5 to 7 years of time frame to award a patent, now Tatkal scheme, 1 year under the Startup India scheme, all this have fast tracked. And but what do you think are still some challenges for deep tech startups on IP protection, and what could be done to make it better?
Yeah, since I'm from the kind of biopharma and typical biotechnology based incubator, okay, the startups, I think in India we have very less these kind of IP professionals who can understand the biology or the deep science. Even the design patents, or these kind of patents can be done. There are some engineering based IP and all is okay, can be managed, but the molecular biology or the typical cellular biology and the mechanistic ways, I think very less IP managers or IP firms that we have. Of course, they are serving the purpose, but it's not in the bigger level. At least Bayrak is having IP cell, and of course we have TTOs that we have now. They are coming into picture and helping from Sign, IKP, and many other incubators. So this is one challenge, that understanding the basic concepts of biology, how to actually convert that particular concept to an intellectual property. I think that is one challenge we faced actually, but still the AIC CCMB could able to address that by connecting to identifying those kind of IP forms privately, and generated more than 20 plus IPR from here. So that is one thing. Secondly, yeah, although TTOs and the IP mechanisms are well spread in the country, still I think the awareness. It's not about the telling about the IPR, the basics and other things, but where a school student comes and asks, "Can you please help me filing this provisional? Are you ready today to file it?" I think that is missing here. Actually, the channels are incubators. Somehow we're trying to help them, but still again, the way we have ATLs and the way we have ACICs from AIM or maybe EUR centers, I think we have to have these kind of mechanisms, not about the IPR workshops and other facilitations, but mechanism of filing and mechanism of technology transfer are to be accelerated. I think this is quickly to answer your question, Bala.
Yeah, thank you, Ramji. And so it's almost an hour plus.
So just adding one thing is that
Yeah.
regarding regulatory thing. Okay,
Okay.
I think already Pranjal mentioned about it, but still we have to have the way we have BIRAC centers, BREC and other things. I think we should be having maybe regional specific or state level regulatory cells maybe anchored in incubators like us. I think that's very important. That's really biggest mess now we have in India. We may be identifying different regulatory agencies to help our startups. We are connecting only, but again, Chintan mentioned one important aspect: the people. Like the way we talk about the doctor and patients ratio, the people in the incubation center, the capacity is very less. So why can't we actually have such kind of a center of excellences, not about the buildings and infrastructure, but about the people and brains? I think that will solve the issue majorly in our country. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ramji. Since we have exceeded about an hour's time, I would request each of you to give a closing comment. I'm also not seeing any questions from the audience. So each one of you give a closing comment with respect to the discussions we had, and what do you think one important aspect that could be addressed in the ecosystem. So each one of you, starting with Queenie.
Bala, why don't you flip the order at least this time?
Okay. I'll start with Ramji. Okay, we'll go in the reverse order.
Yeah, I mean, since there is a topic of ecosystem things, I always tell about some of the examples how we actually try to help each other locally. About 70 plus incubators, where at least 30-40 incubators meet each month. One thing, the hand holding of incubators, not only within the state, but externally. I think recently Kolkata, because past 5 to 7 years, people are trying actually to help something locally. But again, local government issues, I can't comment much. They say, I mean, I'm not saying, but whatever. So I think, they came here, spend 1 week time here. So Hyderabad and Kolkata, we're trying to actually help them. So this way, I think, the Chintan also mentioned about Rajasthan and Ahmedabad. The clusters are there, for example. How efficient are those 5 clusters in India? Greatest initiative by the PSA. But who is taking the leadership or ownership? The way in Hyderabad, at least 5 to 10 incubators, they come forward and do these incubators meet up, bring in some kind of value to the state, all other incubators, etc. I think, what I'm trying to help to convey here is that please try to actually take the ownership, each incubator. I think handhold with other people as well. Then only actually we can actually help our startups and our incubators. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramji. Pranjal, would you like to provide a closing comment?
Yes, sir. So I believe for emerging technologies, think tanks, Niti Aayog is doing a fantastic job. Startup India is doing a fantastic job. If there can be think tanks which include relevant industry stakeholders, academicians, and international experts if required, and they can help government charter policy for very like the emerging areas, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is EVs, flying taxis, satellites, and space, and help with policy that enables these startups, whatever the requirements are, whether it is land, whether it is a testing facility, whether it is access to labs, and so on and so forth. These will allow the next set of 10, 20, 50 deep tech startups to come out of India in the next decade or so. So that is my only request.
Thank you, Pranjal. Chintan?
I would think again, coming back to a couple of the points that we were discussing earlier, that while a lot of the ecosystem gaps which existed few years, decades back have now been plugged, whether it is incubation space, facilities, funding to a large extent, programs, incubation acceleration programs, scouting, right? I mean, now there is enough kind of social media buzz and enough programs going on, and startups know about incubators. Incubators are able to kind of reach out to startups through social media, etc. So some of these, I'm not saying that they have been completely solved, but to a large extent they have been taken care of through some of the policies and the incubators which have been set up. The focus perhaps going ahead needs to be uh, on perhaps ensuring that the business side of the startup, right, once the startup has maybe moved from a prototype to a commercialization stage, which is what our focus has been all throughout. That's still not the end of the journey. The business still needs to be made. Maybe you have done a commercial pilot, but the business model still needs validation. You still need market access. You still need to focus on those fundamentals. I think what Toini was also talking about. And a lot of incubators or incubation staff may not have that deep an experience to understand the difference between things which are not that fundamental, which may be important, valuation, monthly, month-on-month growth, etc. But and the real fundamentals on which a business gets built for the long term. Because as most of us are government funded, public funded, we need to focus on long-term value creation rather than essentially looking at creating just unicorns. Nothing against unicorns. I mean, one of our startups is a unicorn. But again, that ability to differentiate between what is value creation and what is not necessarily value creation. And again, it's maybe Ramji's point that needs to percolate down in the incubation teams, in the incubation centers, which are all around, and they have an important role to play there. Yeah.
Thank you for your candid thoughts. And Poini, it's your turn.
Sure. So I think since we are talking to incubators, and I'm just trying to connect the dot what Dr. Anita Gupta said and also my colleagues here said. The thing is that ecosystem has really matured. Yeah. There are two things like what Anita Gupta was talking about, assessment metrics, right? I agree with Chintan. I don't think we should be running basically after creating unicorn. That's not our mandate also. Let me put this way, unless it comes top down. Yeah. But till then, our mandate is to really bring out good startup, bring them, basically connect them to basically, market and connect them to larger ecosystem. So two things basically as an incubator community we really need to focus on is that ecosystem has matured and how as an incubator we are really plugged in and leveraging that ecosystem. Yeah, be it industry, be it like government, be it regulator, be it like investors, everything put together. And second thing is that what Dr. Gupta was telling, right, that you can't be perpetually dependent on government programs and grants, right? As an incubator, we are also kind of a quasi-commercial entity. And I think we need to have while we work with our startup to create their business model, we also ought to focus on our own house to create our own sustainability model. I think these are the two things basically I would like to.
Thank you. It was a fantastic panel, amazing discussions, very deep insights. I'm sure anyone connected with the incubation ecosystem would enjoy this discussion. And so thank you, Poini, Ramji, Pranjal, and Chintan for your valuable time and sharing your point in a very candid manner. And so thank you all, and over to Prasad for the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Prasad, you need to unmute. Prasad, you are not audible. No, you are not audible. Still not audible, Prasad. Prasad, do you have some? Okay, Prasad, if you have issues, shall I go ahead and proceed? Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, on behalf of the organizers, Technology Development Board and ISBA, I thank Dr. Anita Gupta for delivering the keynote address this afternoon, and all the panelists, Poini, Dr. Ramji, Pranjal, and Chintan for their valuable time and sharing their wisdom. And also thank all the participants for taking time in attending this session. I hope this was useful. Also thank the support team from Technology Development Board for arranging this in a seamless manner. So thank you all. Look forward to connecting with you all soon. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.